Welcome everyone to this week's edition of Commercial Real Estate 101. It's great to see you all this morning, or this, I guess, midday for some of you, maybe morning, depending if you're tuning in on the West Coast. But we're excited to have you guys tuning in. We're also live on Facebook, so hello to everyone on Facebook as well. Today, we actually have a great guest, and I'm really excited to dive into our conversation. His name's David Poline. He owns a firm that works with essentially recruitment in the commercial real estate industry, and we're going to be diving into a lot of concepts related to the recruitment process and really what employers are looking for in this pre-COVID and during and then after COVID. So excited to host you, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Raphael. I've seen a number of your other events and was very honored and excited to have gotten the invite to join. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And we actually both know Judy Fox. And so I've obviously, seen you through, your collaboration with her. So I know you're going to be providing a ton of value to the group. And I know that the people who are here are going to gain some value from it. So real quick, what we usually do when we first interview people is to learn a little bit more about them as an individual. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and really what got you into commercial real estate?
Sure. So I actually, coming out of college, I really had no knowledge about the commercial real estate industry beyond the fact that my father was a recruiter in the business. So I was around it in a kind of a peripheral way. I was prepared to go into banking in New York after graduating in 1998 and just wasn't feeling excited about it. It just felt kind of like somewhat of a default position that people coming out of business school take. And my dad made me aware of a company down in the Tampa St. Pete area called Sembler, who had been looking for years to hire somebody as kind of a rotating intern coming out of college. And my dad just said, we don't place people like that. And it just so happened that year, Craig Scher, the CEO, asked him if he knew anyone that year. And I guess, well, I only know one person. That's my son who's graduating. So I was a little hesitant, coming out of the Northeast. I was up in Philly. The thought of moving to St. Petersburg, Florida, wasn't at the exact top of my list at that point, but got a chance to go visit the office in like mid-February of that year, which was a nice change of environment and weather. Just saw what they were doing. Sembler was at that point embarking on two really cool lifestyle projects, Centro Ybor in Tampa and Bay Walk in St. Pete. Just felt a ton of energy of what was going on in that company and decided to take a chance and move down there.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people in the commercial business come from, not everyone, but some come from different backgrounds. Like I'm an engineer by trade. I came from the software business. I've met people who were in banking. I've met people who were in insurance. I've met people who were in all different types of industries that eventually made their way into the commercial space. So I'm sure your story resonates with some people in the audience because of the fact that, you don't really choose. I mean, you can choose the commercial real estate industry, but there's some times where you kind of fall into it. And I'm sure you
totally right.
Yeah.
With a little bit of help, of course. I mean, I'm not going to say it wasn't, without that push, probably wouldn't have ended up in that direction, but it was a great decision. And then, worked in that world for about 5 years, had always wanted to go to law school. After about that 5-year point, kind of pulled the ripcord and went back to school, was a real estate lawyer for a little while, and then eventually meandered my way to the recruitment space. So it's been an interesting path and kind of, I guess, my lesson that, people ask me about is, just because you start in one area doesn't mean you can't pivot maybe even multiple times. That's the beauty of, these opportunities that we have in front of us. You just never know where they're going to take you.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that statement. So you say you're working in the recruitment business for commercial real estate. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means and maybe walk us through a day in the life of what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. So Poline Associates is an executive search, recruiting, headhunting, whatever term you like, firm that specializes in the commercial real estate world. What that means is companies who operate in that space, whether they're owners, developers, landlords, investors, even some retailers, some third-party companies, who are looking to hire, very specific needs for their company and either don't have the time, the resources, the energy to engage in that process alone, will hire us in order to help them meet those needs. And so our job essentially is to pair, talented individuals in this industry with opportunities that make sense for them. So whether it's, somebody who's in leasing, property and asset management, development, construction, our job really is to help the company locate and find the best person that they can hire for a given position. And so my day is full of talking to clients who are telling us about their specific needs, helping them with crafting job descriptions. It's, working and calling individuals who either we have a hunch might be interested in a role, or maybe are not even looking at all and just wanting to see, hey, if you were presented with this opportunity, would you make a leap? And then from there, it's just, it's essentially working out a deal. It's helping guide them through the interview process, through an offer process, helping them give notice at their existing company if they're having to leave their position, and then helping with the onboarding in their new role.
That's awesome. Yeah, no. And you obviously, like you said, you work with all different types of businesses within the commercial space. So I'm assuming you work on the brokerage side. You also work potentially with developers, investors, et cetera. So that's a pretty unique, experience level. Because again, an investor is probably going to be looking for something different than maybe a brokerage will, or are there some corollaries there between roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think, within the brokerage space, I will say our experience probably is a little bit more limited there than in other areas. And I think the reason for that is there's so much networking that goes on among brokerage firms, people who, might have been at CBRE, who were interested, they hear about an opportunity at Cushman or at JLL.
Sure.
They may be able to make that leap kind of on their own. Whereas, somebody, if it's a developer or, a publicly traded REIT, they may, use us to help them identify candidates that either are or aren't located in that market. So there can definitely be overlaps in terms of some of the qualities that the people have that are going into those different positions, but it's all, usually comes down to the job spec itself. And then, if it's more of a brokerage oriented role, somebody who's going to be comfortable in a kind of commission framework.
Yeah, 100% true. So one thing I wanted to ask you was related to how has the employment landscape changed during this period of time? Because I imagine prior to COVID, the landscape was completely different than what it is today. So could you kind of tell us a little bit about how that landscape shifted through this pandemic situation that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, it really has, excuse me, it's been whiplash kind of twice. We went from, the end of 2019, January, February 2020, feeling really good about, the job market. There were tons and tons of opportunities. It was challenging to find people. And then literally starting, call it March 15th, everything we were working on just done. It was like somebody had just taken the spigot outside and turned it off. Gradually, I think as we got through 2020, the year kind of went on, we started to sort of figure out how to live our lives in this pandemic world. Some of the roles came back, some didn't quite yet. And then, what we started noticing is each quarter, starting really in the fourth quarter of 2020 into 21, by the time we got into the spring, we had almost whiplash back the other way, where everybody decided, we're coming out of this, we need to hire. Probably, what ended up happening, I think, was a lot of people left our industry. A lot of people either took an early retirement if they were of that age. They just felt like they were going to move into something else. And so I think we're finding ourselves now, at least from what we're seeing, with a little bit of a shortage in terms of people to fill the roles that are now open and available.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And like you said, anytime again, real estate's cyclical. So in a period of economic depression, which in was unavoidable, really, given the scope of the pandemic situation we found ourselves in. Naturally, there's going to be some attrition in the industry. So, but I think, as you probably imagine, as you probably agree, that over the next 6 to 12 months, as we've been continuing to open up, these types of opportunities are beginning to come about again. So hopefully that bodes well for you. And I know it's been boding well on our end on the brokerage side. We've been seeing a lot of activity, in particular on the investment side, with people just looking to place their money places. So
it does feel that way. I feel like it seems like people put their money kind of on hold, for a long time, and now are back at it and interested in figuring out where they can invest it.
Sure, definitely. So when you're looking at, potential candidates for some of your clients, what are some of the top characteristics that you look for in these potential candidates? And obviously it's going to depend on what type of client you're working with, but if you can kind of give us a broad overview of maybe, just different examples, that'd be great.
Sure. I think really the two main categories that we see in terms of, how to really do a good match between the position and the individual is going to come down to, skill set and experience kind of on one hand, and then sort of personality and some of the intangible stuff on the other hand. And so, immediately, our first sort of pass in terms of, as we look through candidates for a role, is identifying, does this person either have they done elements of this job? Do we see evidence of that in their resume or on a deal sheet? Or does it appear as if they're on a trajectory where they're working their way up to being able to do a job like that? And that's relatively straightforward. Again, the resume is important to accurately portray what someone's done. So you've got to be able to tease out and sometimes read between the lines a little bit to make sure that those skills line up. But once you kind of get through that initial pass, then the question is, okay, hopefully as a recruiter, we have a good sense of kind of the culture, the type of organization that we're working with, what type of people, they generally have success there. And then identifying, whether we think this candidate is going to match that personality, be a good fit in terms of, will they get along? Is it a very sort of highly entrepreneurial, need to change on a dime kind of place? Is it more structured? Is it, you're going to get a lot of support and a lot of guidance, or are they just going to throw you to the wolves and you got to figure it out? So all that stuff, I think, goes into sort of the evaluation phase of understanding whether a candidate and a job are well matched.
For sure. And I'm assuming, once you have that initial vetting of their background and resume, et cetera, you go through a process of probably sitting down with them. Do you do like personality tests just depending on the job, or how does that usually work, that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty much every candidate that we work with will do some type of initial screening conversation. We don't necessarily portray it or set it up as an interview, but it's really a chance for us to have a conversation with them, get to know them, start to get a feel of their personality, start to understand and unpack, maybe what's not fully clear from the resume. There are some clients that do ask us straight away, this is the personality assessment we like to use. Some companies, DLC Management is one in particular that's very fond of the Predictive Index. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar, but it's essentially it's a personality driven assessment where it creates a profile, and there are, I think, 8 different profiles that you could fit under. And they try to match those to whatever the job spec is to see if it's a good fit. We've partnered in the past with a company called the Harrison, which is a combination of personality, but also kind of measures job preferences. So that's one where you can kind of set a profile or a template of what's going to be important in that job, and then see how the candidate matches up with those characteristics. So again, definitely some kind of, initial screen. And then sometimes, depending on who the client is, a personality assessment on top of that.
Definitely. And the DLC, is that with Chris Ressa, I'm assuming?
It is. Yeah. It is. They have done extensive training with the Predictive Index. It's a really important part of their vetting process. Chris would tell you that anytime he ever went with his gut instinct over what the PI told him, it's been a mistake. I don't know if he's got the data to prove that, but it's an interesting dynamic, because as a recruiter, you're not necessarily wanting companies to put up roadblocks in front of your candidates sort of before they can even make an impression. But, once we kind of got used to the process with them and clear about how they were going to use the PI for their vetting, we've been able to sort of manage that a little bit better.
For sure. And I mean, there's definitely some value in getting an understanding of how you interact with the world, right? Because there's certain people, like you said, there could be a very entrepreneurial type environment. And if you take one of these predictive analysis tests, I'm assuming it can tell you at least an idea of how they operate within a very chaotic or very, entrepreneurial environment. Whereas, someone who's relies on a significant amount of structure may or may not do well in that role. So I definitely think they probably have their place, but you're right. I think the fit part is the huge thing. So, I mean, when I was looking at opportunities within the brokerage community, I mean, I talked to various different brokerages, and from a cultural standpoint, I eventually settled on one that really aligned with what my goals were. And then obviously, like, do you get along, and can you actually interact with one another on a day-to-day basis and try to achieve the overall mission? And so that's great insight on your end. So once you have your candidate, right, you've kind of done the initial screening, you've had an initial consultation, and you think they'd be a good fit for a particular client of yours. What are some of the top tips you provide them before they go into the interview, and kind of, share some of those insights would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, the interview prep, phone call that we do with our candidates is potentially one of the most valuable pieces of the recruitment kind of journey with them, because particularly in situations where we have a good understanding of who the client is, who the individual is that's interviewing with them, we can provide them with some important insights about their personality, about their interview style, about their hot button issues that are important to them, elements of the job description that may be more important to one interviewer versus another interviewer. And so really it's sitting down with them and going through all of those different phases. We talked about Chris Russ a minute ago. Chris has a super unique interview style that's unlike anybody else that I think, is out there. He likes to pose kind of sometimes a little bit outside the box questions, sometimes that can be a little provocative, to see kind of how the candidate responds. How do they handle being uncomfortable in a situation like that? And so being able to give a candidate some insight about what that's going to look like in advance, can really help them avoid, kind of being that deer in the headlights where they're like, I don't know how to answer this because it's just such an unusual question. More often than not, we're talking about things like, helping them understand, that for client A, it's important to really understand what the portfolio is. For client B, it's much more important to kind of be clear on sort of the elements of the job description you've done. So each prep is tailored a little bit differently for the client, but inevitably it's all about just helping get that candidate as comfortable as possible before an interview, which is an inherently stressful situation.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, anyone who's been through an interview can attest to that, So the more prep you have on the front end is more beneficial. I mean, I've been in interviews where, they kind of give you riddles. I was in the software side, and one of the interviews that I did is like, hey, here's a riddle, and go on the whiteboard and try to figure it out. And it's just kind of like on the winging it, and you're just like, okay. And the logic there is that they don't want to see you solve it. They just want to see how you think through these kind of, abstract problems. And so obviously there's method to the madness when it comes to some of these interviews. That's awesome.
Yes, definitely true.
So one thing that I stress on, and, I think is extremely important, in particular in today's digital age, is personal branding. And especially in the commercial real estate business, where I think that we've kind of lagged behind other industries when it comes to technological essentially adapting or adopting different technological, methods, especially social media and various other, mediums. So could you tell us a little bit about the importance of personal branding to securing some of these top roles?
Sure. No, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, the way that that's just become hugely important in this day and age. And I mean, just, you need to make the assumption that the minute your resume goes to a hiring official, the very first thing they're going to do, look you up on LinkedIn, potentially look you up on Facebook, potentially look you up on Instagram. They're going to want to know who you are, what you're about, even before they decide whether to bring you in for an interview or not. These first impression pieces can really help supplement what's in a resume, because let's face it, a resume is a two-dimensional thing. It gives you a history of the person, but it doesn't really give you a whole lot of insight into who they are as a person. What you can put on your LinkedIn profile and other social media sites really does a great job of helping to fill out kind of some of the picture for them and gives them a better sense of what's going on before an interview. So, we are constantly advising our candidates, as just as important as getting your resume up to date, get that LinkedIn profile looking good as well. Get a professional headshot taken. Make sure that your dates that you have on your different jobs, they all line up perfectly with what's in the resume. You don't want any discrepancies. Make sure that you're giving good descriptors on what you've done at each individual stop. Include some interests, include some things personal about yourself that's going to give the hiring manager a more complete picture of, do I want to, am I going to want to spend 10 hours a day with this person? Maybe if we have some common interests and things that we like, and or they seem to be a well-rounded, interesting person, that's going to give you an edge over someone that doesn't have that profile. So I think, Raphael, your point is 100% on the money. It's huge.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we both, prior to the live stream, we were talking about a friend of ours, Judy Fox, who is kind of a big proponent of LinkedIn and utilizing some of the features that LinkedIn inherently has. I mean, you got the featured section within your profile. If you write some articles or have a video or something like that, utilize that section, because, that's one of the first things that people look at when they first go to your profile. So really, it's just an opportunity for you to have a great first impression, because like you said, an employer, as soon as you receive a resume, first place they go to is Google, and they're going to look at your LinkedIn profile. They're going to look at whatever is on their Google search and search your name. Sometimes you'd be surprised, especially if you haven't done it in a while, you'd be surprised sometimes what pops up. So definitely something to consider.
And just to kind of put a bow on this, it's a double-edged sword as well. So on the one hand, these social media sites can very much be used as a huge pro and a huge benefit, but you also need to be very careful about what's out there that may not cast you in the most professional light as well. So, if you're embarking on a job search, you want to do a pretty good scrub of what you've got out there that's public. If there's some things on Instagram that, you just want your friends to see, then make it private. At this point, the last thing you want is someone making an impression about you that may not be fair or accurate because they just saw a picture of you at spring break when you were, 10 years ago. So, we always advise our candidates just to be very, a little bit hyper aware of their online presence, just to make sure what's out there and what's public cast them in the most favorable light.
For sure. Just controlling, you control your personal brand. You can choose what you show to the world. And if you can really be deliberate about it, you could definitely have a positive impact on those that eventually search you out. So
yeah,
that's awesome. So we've talked about this briefly before, but what advice would you give to people who are looking to break into the industry? So let's say that they're a professional in some other industry. Maybe it's a corollary industry, maybe it's unrelated, but they're looking to break into, either a development company, or they're looking to, get an asset management or something along those lines. What advice would you give to individuals in that boat?
Sure. I think really two pieces of advice really stand out to me. The first is really being as introspective as you can and really kind of understanding yourself, the things that you like, the things that you're good at, the things that you're passionate about, to really get clear on those things. Because without really having that understanding of what makes you tick and what's important to you, it's going to be very hard for you to pivot into anything new, because people are going to ask you the question, well, why would you want to make the leap? Until you've really spent some time and write out notes, write out ideas. What is it about myself that, I love to write? I love to, interact with people. I love the thrill of chasing a tenant to make a deal, or chasing a prospect if you're in sales. So, piece one is really an internal sort of inventory of who you are, what you're about. Piece number two is trying to figure out how to draw connections between your prior career and what you want your career to be in real estate. So, if you're somebody that is extremely analytical and numbers oriented, and that you enjoy that, there's going to be a part of commercial real estate that's for you. Underwriting, looking at new deals, asset management. Those are all going to be areas where you can kind of parlay a skill set that was geared towards something completely different and move it into a new area. If you're the kind of person that's very sales oriented, if you're, you get energy and you derive a lot of, satisfaction from interacting with people and, helping them understand a new product or a new service, that might make you cut out to be a leasing person. And so think about how those connections get made so that when you're asked about it, it's a relatively easy conversation to kind of guide the hiring manager from your past into them being able to see you in this future role.
100%. And I think one of the main takeaways is a value proposition. Like, what's your value proposition? Like, if you're, like you said, if you come from a technical background, how can your skill set benefit the employer? Because at the end of the day, that's why the employer is hiring you. They want to have some value from you. So framing your package as, hey, because I have this unique experience from whatever I was doing before, this is how I can apply it within the business and essentially affect the bottom line. So I think that's some great advice.
That you raised. I mean, that's a really great point. That's taking it almost from what I was talking about in terms of, being very focused on yourself, but then also thinking about it from the employer standpoint, which of course is going to be very impactful. So great thought there as well, Raphael.
That's awesome. So now we've kind of addressed some of those individuals that had some background in some other roles that want to transition into the commercial real estate industry. I was wondering if you could share some advice to those who are currently in a role, whether that's in asset management or working in some development company, that are at a point in their career where they want to essentially take the next step. What advice would you give to someone as far as, seeking out some of those more, VP, executive roles within whatever companies that they're looking for?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I guess the first question you really kind of need to ask yourself is, is there a path for me at the current company that I'm with? I'm a director of asset management. I see that there's a VP ahead of me. He or she is only, 3 or 4 years older than me. Is my path blocked? Is there sufficient growth at this company that there could be another spot that opens up, that I could potentially move into? All those kinds of questions. Or, I'm in asset management today, but I've done a little bit of work on the development or leasing side. Is there a path for me to sort of kind of move and shift a little bit to a different direction to provide myself some growth? So, looking at that, I think, and really evaluating, what do I have here at my current company? Can I grow here if I want to? If after, doing that analysis, your answer is no, then, I think then looking outside becomes, the most viable option. And so the question then becomes, as you present yourself to a potentially hiring company, how do I show them I'm ready for that next step? So a few things could be seeking out some mentorship, leveraging connections you have, maybe people that are at the level you want to be, talking to them, understanding from them kind of their journey and how they got from, where they started up to the position they're now. Learning to find out whether, are there educational or certification type programs that I might be able to enhance my resume with. You may not need to get an MBA, but maybe, if you're on the management side, maybe becoming a CSM, certified shopping center manager, maybe that might open some doors. And then lastly, is just, in my view, is just traditional networking. Go out and meet people, go and have that discussion that Raphael was just talking about. Explain your value proposition, why you feel like you could be, the next important hire for that company and to take them in whatever area you're in to that next level. So those would be some of the things I think I would be thinking about, at least at the start.
For sure. And I'll kind of echo the networking aspect. I mean, that's why I think LinkedIn is so huge, because when I was looking at, just to give you background on me, I studied industrial engineering and economics in college. And then after college, I was looking to get into the software business. And so I had no real software training, but I knew that was where I wanted to be. So what I did is I started reaching out to people that were in positions that I wanted to be at, and just on LinkedIn, and said, hey, I just wanted to have a 15-minute conversation with you, and just do that over and over and over and over, and keep doing that, and try to leverage those relationships into some other opportunities. And not only that, but you'll learn whether or not it is something you're looking to do. You may have a conversation with them and be like, actually, this sounds terrible. Like, I don't want to do this at all, but you don't know until you start, talking to people who really have that experience. And, maybe you find a good fit, and that person can introduce you to someone else or pass along your resume to someone else. And really that's the way business is done.
You'd be shocked, I think, if you're not somebody who's ever kind of gone down that path before, just how willing people are to carve out the time to help, to have a conversation about what they do. I think as human beings, we naturally, we enjoy sharing, and we enjoy, if we have an opportunity to help people, by and large, I think most people are gonna take you up on that and sit down with you for 10 or 15 minutes and give you their story. And yeah, I think that's invaluable for also understanding, whether you really want to do what you think you want to do.
Yeah. And especially if you show initiative and then establish some sort of connection point,
Right.
Like if you were in some of the same organizations, or you were you maybe they had a podcast and you listen to the podcast and you reference something that they talked about within the podcast. Now it shows that you have some sort of interest level, some sort of engagement with that individual. And sure, I mean, most people would be happy to talk to you for 10 or 15 minutes. So
yeah, no, and that's a great tip, not just for networking, but even going back to, you had asked me about interview preparation, being really prepared, doing your homework, getting really comfortable talking about a company's portfolio or, what have you, I think can really be an element that kind of helps you stand out among the crowd and really push you ahead in terms of a process.
great advice. So right, we're about to open up to questions for the rest of the audience, because I'm sure there's definitely some questions out there. But before we do, I just wanted to ask, what are some of the best resources out there for those individuals who, are interested in either transitioning into the career or breaking into the industry? I don't know if you could share some of the
of course,
journals, publications, etc.
Yeah, I mean, you started by hyping and talking about LinkedIn. I mean, just the forums and the different organizations that have been formed on that platform, really gives you a leg up. So just type in real estate groups and you'll see every different possible kind you can. Our company is always focused more on retail than maybe some of the other asset classes. So we've remained very plugged in with ICSC. They've gone through a massive rebranding. I was going to refer to them as International Council of Shopping Centers, but that is not their name anymore. So they provide different events. They provide different learning opportunities. They provide different certifications. So those are great resources. If you're somebody that's on the office or industrial side, NAOP is an organization that I think can be great. If whatever city you're in, I know like New York City has the Real Estate Board in New York. REBNY is a very popular organization for networking and different educational events. Some national groups, things like the Urban Land Institute. All of these organizations generally do provide at least two things. One is a job board that actually posts different opportunities. And two is networking chances to meet other members and to really grow your sphere of influence.
For sure. Yeah. And I'll add one more. CCIM is another one.
Yeah.
Certified Commercial Investment Member, I think, is the actual acronym. But essentially what it is it's a designation that, brokers, bankers, people in the industry seek out. And it's primarily related to investment real estate. It teaches you how to analyze investment opportunities within real estate. And they have chapters all over the nation. And they usually have some sort of meetups or events that go on. So that's also another organization you could probably tap into and learn a little bit more about the opportunities in the industry.
Yeah. So somebody in the chat, I think, asked about MRICS, and that, I'll be honest with you, is not an organization I have a ton of familiarity with. I'm assuming, just from what I've heard about it, I know that it started out as, I guess, a group for surveyors. I think to the extent that's your area of expertise, then certainly I think it could help. I don't know quite as much about that as some of the other groups.
Sure. All right. Well, I wanted to give the members of the group right now some time to be able to ask their questions. So if you guys want to, feel free to type away in the chat box. I will also be checking on Facebook for any questions that you guys have that are for those of you guys who are watching on Facebook. So feel free to plug away. Let's see. I guess.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Andrew, of course.
Yeah, we're always looking for new talent here in Arizona, but my comment more than a question was going to be, one of the things that we look for is the trainability of a new recruit, kind of the steering the questions toward that. Are they open to listening, or are they more interested in talking? How will they handle the client relationship in terms of soft communication versus knocking them over the head with a hammer? We always take that approach when we're working with clients about educational marketing. And so they can't be educating the client if they're busy talking. So it's just kind of that concept of, is this somebody who's going to be open to training? Is this somebody who's going to be a good fit for our style with our clients?
That's a great point. And I'm sure part of that is also the personality type too, I'd imagine, right? And more,
Yeah,
you
because you get somebody who's into the Excel and they'd prefer to spend all day on an Excel spreadsheet. And then you get the other individual who'd prefer to spend all day on the phone. And in this industry, we tend to need a mixture of both, and a balance of learning the pros and cons of, just because somebody thinks they know a little bit about real estate, those of us who've done it for decades, it truly takes 2-3 years to get a basic proficiency level. And then from there, we continue growing. I mean, I'm still learning things every day. So
100%. Yeah. I mean, that's why a lot of people focus on one property type. I mean, you could almost never become an expert in every type of property within commercial real estate. So you're right. I mean, there's just so much to learn. So great advice, Andrew. Really appreciate that. So we had a question from Shisham. I hope I said that right. I don't want to mispronounce it, but he said, your view on prop tech technology changing the CRE landscape and its effect on future job. Are technology skills getting more sought after compared to typical roles?
So it's a great question. It's interesting. I feel like commercial real estate world, particularly on the shopping center side, has been one of the slower areas to adapt to technological changes. I think there's been a fair amount of resistance to in introducing some of these new technologies and ideas. I think that tide has turned a little bit, maybe even a lot. I think the prop tech side is going to absolutely be a driver of growth within our industry. It's going to bring younger people into the industry, which I think we desperately need. It's going to bring people from different backgrounds, including technology background, which I think is also going to be necessary to make the industry more dynamic. So the short answer to you is yes. I think those technological skills will become more sought after, even just beyond kind of the ones that are traditionally relied on, like Excel and Argus for folks on the more analytical sides.
Awesome, great advice. All right, so Stanford, hey Stanford, he has a he has a question. Any pointers on standing out during the training process?
So I guess, Stanford, I don't know if you're available to unmute. Maybe just give me a little bit more clarity on kind of what exactly you're asking there in terms of, like, once you're already on board and then you're doing the training work. Is that kind of what you're asking about?
I'm not sure if he's
not sure there was. So I mean, yeah. I guess, if I had just had to kind of answer that without too much context, I would say just being a sponge, trying to absorb as much as you can, trying to, even if you came into a position, let's say you started at a big company and they have some kind of rotational program, and, you really had your aspirations on, I really want to focus on development. Still being open-minded and really absorbing what you can about leasing and about asset and property management, making you the most well-rounded individual you can, I think is going to help sort of launch you forward quicker. Just the idea of only focusing on kind of the development topics, you'll certainly get something out of that, but being willing to expand your horizons more beyond that as well, I think is something really important.
Great advice. Thanks, David.
Sure.
All right. So Walter said, thank you for the tips. I'm interested in moving forward with my career by disrupting my current role. Much appreciated. So that's awesome.
Great. Good luck.
Yeah, no, for sure. Tamika. Hey, Tamika. So she's asking, can you give more ideas on using your transferable skills for CRE on your resume or LinkedIn? It's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, sort of capsulizing that and putting it in writing can be a little more challenging than talking about it. But I think to the extent that, I think a big part of that, at least on the resume, may be a function of tailoring a given resume for a certain position. I mean, the last thing you want to do is create, 10,000 different resume versions and have one for each job. But if you're finding that you're applying for, let's say, I'm going to use an example. Say you're a salesperson, you're doing pharmaceutical sales, and you decide you want to move into real estate and you want to look for leasing jobs. Creating a resume that really highlights the things that you've done, the things you have done in your pharmaceutical sales job that you think match up well with a leasing role is important. So what does that include? Market analysis, understanding kind of a trade area or a given, region that you're going to operate in. What does the competition look like? That's a huge part of the leasing game, particularly, on the landlord side where you're trying to identify prospects for your shopping center. Is your real estate better than someone else's? Are you out positioned? Understanding and being comfortable cold calling and prospecting for potential new leads. Being able to highlight those things, even if it's not in the context of commercial leasing, if you've done that in a prior role, another sales role, I think hopefully, the company that's going to be hiring you can make that connection between those two things.
Definitely. That's some great advice, really. Yeah. I mean, and that just takes some introspection and seeing like, what have I done over the last few years? And then just taking the time to sit down and really see, how can I project this in a way that is attractive for an employer that's seeking this one particular role. So.
Yeah. And also just getting really clear and educated on, what is the role that I'm looking at, what does this person do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure.
What does that job description look like? Is there somebody that can help me understand, okay, this is what your day-to-day is going to really look like in this role, so that you can kind of go and say, okay, bullet point 1, I've done these 2 things that are similar. Bullet point 2, maybe not as much. Bullet point 3, here's a couple of things I've done. So that you can really target those things. And so the resume that you're sharing, even if it's not in the same field, the hiring manager can kind of think, okay, I can see you doing this role and doing it well.
100%. And reach out to people that are different companies that do the same role on LinkedIn and talk to them and see what their day-to-day operations are. And then gives you some framework off which to go off. All right. So we have Leonard. Hey, Leonard. Good seeing you. I live in Northern California and would like to become part of commercial real estate networking group, since I have a background in underwriting, residential, and commercial lending. Would like learning more on commercial real estate, since that's where I love doing since I enjoy community involvement. So that's awesome. Yes. And I like David mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of different commercial real estate organizations out there that you can get involved with. There's a lot of national ones, ULI, CCIM, he was mentioning NAOP. There's various other ones, just depending on what your interest is in, if it's industrial or retail or, office, et cetera.
And there may also be, some, if you want to start on a little bit of a smaller scale, there might be also some specific groups, in Northern California. So if you're in the Bay Area, for example, there may be some there in Sacramento, in further Northern California, you might just want to jump on the internet and see if you can find, some smaller groups, and then maybe start building outward from there. Because I think, it's a little more daunting with these national organizations because there's so many people. If you start local, I think you have a better chance of making a bigger impact there.
Awesome advice. All right, Andrew. Andrew would share that he's always looking for new talent. That's awesome. Yeah. So if you're in Arizona, you feel like it's a good fit. Awesome. All right. I'm gonna try to say this. Need Made. So hopefully I didn't butcher that. I'm sorry if I did. But he said, hey there, just want to find out what options you guys would suggest for new graduates from the property and related sectors from our other countries. How much harder is it for poorly experienced foreigners to find roles in your market?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. I'm not going to lie, it is harder for sure. And I think part of it is just a lack of familiarity, between how real estate works here versus how it works elsewhere. I mean, even in a country that has as many similarities to us as England, just learning and hearing about how they handle property transactions there is remarkably different. So, if you're from, Asia or Africa or countries in South America, I can only imagine, how much the differences are. So I think the key for someone in the position that you described is coming in and trying to find as many educational resources about American real estate and how transactions work, how, you can get licensed in whatever state you're living in if you want to try to become or get your real estate license, joining some of these organizations that may have certification opportunities. The more that you can do to sort of eliminate the potential bias of the fact that you aren't familiar, with the traditions and how they, how real estate is conveyed and whatnot here, the more you can do to show that you've picked up that information, I think the better off you're going to be in terms of landing a position.
Phenomenal advice. That's awesome. All right, Leonard, he said, for persons who are not licensed for commercial real estate sales, how does one become licensed individually? Yeah, and so I think Andrew did answer it. So each state has their own individual requirements, but some firms will help you with that. So that's exactly right. Like here in Kentucky, for example, there's one license to sell both residential and commercial real estate. I don't know if that's the case all across the nation, but
yeah, that's when networking becomes really important, for you to get your individual salesperson's license and to be able to hang that, and it's sort of that expression just sort of means have a bigger brokerage firm hold that for you. Mm-hmm. You're not necessarily working for them, but they're holding onto your license so that, to the extent there's ever an issue, there's a licensed real estate broker that can be contacted in that kind of situation. But yeah, I think Andrew's probably the one who's, and Raphael are probably the ones who are more well-versed on that than I would be.
For sure. All right. Okay. Any other questions? I'm checking Facebook as well. We've had several people tuning in. No questions so far. Do you have anything that you think I should have asked you that maybe I didn't? No, I just always like posing that question because sometimes someone has like a particular thing that they think is extremely important to share, which I may have or may not have asked. So.
No, I think your questions were all really comprehensive as it related to the process, of how we work, particularly with candidates, which I figured was going to be probably the more important aspect of this. I will say a couple of things just sort of related to search firms generally, since I think some of you may have had some experience working with a recruiter, some of you may not have. First and foremost, 95 to 99% of the time, there is not an exclusive relationship. So just because you're working with me, because you saw an interesting opportunity on my website, that does not prevent you at all from working with any other search firm or pursuing any other opportunities. This is, we are one of what can be many resources for you in helping with a search. And so I would say if any recruiter comes to you and says, you're locked in with me, be very cautious about that. I do know that there are some organizations that will specifically represent you and then present your information to a lot of different companies. That's kind of a different model than what we do, where we work for the individual companies or the companies that are out there. But I would just be very wary in terms of anybody that either asks you for money or says that it's an exclusive relationship. Just be very cautious about that, because that might not be kosher.
Awesome. Great caution there. That's awesome. Okay. Well, if anyone, no other questions? Okay, awesome. Well, first
I think sorry, Raphael. I think there was one more that just popped up.
Oh, okay. So is it Stanford, I believe?
There's one, I think, in Demande.
In Demande. Okay, so we'll have, if I may ask the last question, for the development companies and investors you work with, what proportion of how many are open to offshore investment, I guess is what his question was.
Oh, yeah. I honestly can't speak to that, to be honest with you. That's not generally information they share with me.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But again, I think it's just a function of networking and finding out who might be. And then Stanford, I guess, was there a question there?
Yeah. We'll have Stanford be the last question, just because we want to make sure that we end in an appropriate time. So Stanford asks, currently with Marcus and Milchap with product type of mixed use multifamily, to simplify my question from earlier, do you guys have any tips on standing out in a shop of that size with a fast paced environment?
Yeah, I mean that's a really great question, and one that I think probably we all would want to know in any job that we're working on. And Raphael, in his role probably has the same experience. I mean, I think a lot of times it's production. Your ability to get deals done, your ability to bring in commissions if it's in a brokerage world, if you're in-house somewhere, bring in leases or development deals or whatever. I'd say beyond that, though, some of the intangible things in terms of, being a really good teammate, being somebody who, works well and especially if you're working in kind of a partnership situation where, the sum of you and your partner ends up being greater than each of you individually, I think, that's also an attribute that a lot of companies are looking for. Some of these, like, I guess in sports, they call them, glue guys or gals, where you're kind of helping to keep a cohesive team together. So, I don't think it's always production, but I do think that's, for better or for worse, is a big part of it.
Yes. Great advice there. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we have all the questions that we had answered. So again, David, I really appreciate you stopping by today and sharing your insights with the group. I know a lot of people got a lot out of this, and we've also been recording this as well. So this will be able to be viewed in perpetuity. As far as, well, it's a good thing. It's been able to do it. Yeah, of course. So for those of individuals who have been listening to this or watching this that want to learn more about you or get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. We've got a website, www.polineassociates.com. My email address is just david@polineassociates.com, or probably the easiest thing is, since we've been hyping up LinkedIn, just go to my LinkedIn profile. It's just David Poline, and feel free to send me a message and give me your contact information. We can set up a call. You can share a resume with me that way, whatever's easy. And whether you're in need of your recruiting help today or in 5 years or never, just always good to network and interact and meet new people.
For sure. Yeah. And we'll be including that. So for those of you guys who are watching this on YouTube or listening to this in a podcast format, we're going to be including this in the show notes as well. So if you need to get in contact with David, you can do that through the description below. So again, thank you guys so much for stopping by. It's always a pleasure to see you all, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks so much for having me.
See you guys.